high in the northern Ural Mountains of Russia, far beyond any permanent settlement, and far beyond any realistic chance of rescue. There is a vast stretch of frozen wilderness where violent winds, deep snow, and complete isolation define every moment of survival. In winter, the temperature regularly drops below -30 degrees Celsius, and storms can appear without warning, swallowing entire mountain slopes in white fog and wind. In February of 1959, 9 experienced young hikers entered this region on what was supposed to be a carefully planned and professionally organized expedition. None of them would ever return. What search teams eventually discovered on that mountain would become one of the most disturbing and debated mysteries in modern history. A tent cut open from the inside, bare and sock-covered footprints leading into a frozen forest, bodies scattered across the landscape in positions that suggested panic, confusion, and desperate attempts to survive. Some of the hikers appeared to have simply frozen to death. Others suffered massive internal injuries that investigators could not easily explain. One woman was found without her tongue. And years later, traces of unexplained radiation would only deepen the mystery. This is the true story of the Dyatlov Pass Incident. The group originally consisted of 10 hikers, all of them students or recent graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute in the city of Sverdlovsk. They were not thrill seekers, and they were not inexperienced tourists. Every member of the group had already completed difficult winter expeditions and had received professional training in long-distance skiing and mountain travel. Their expedition was officially registered and approved by Soviet sporting authorities. The leader of the group was 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov. Friends described him as calm, methodical, and highly disciplined. He was known for carefully planning routes, managing supplies, and keeping morale high during difficult conditions. The goal of the expedition was to reach a remote area in the northern Urals and complete a challenging ski route that would qualify the group for the highest level of hiking certification in the Soviet Union. This was an important achievement for young outdoor athletes at the time. On January 23, 1959, the group left their city by train, carrying heavy backpacks filled with food, cameras, notebooks, spare clothing, and emergency equipment. Only a few days into the journey, however, one member of the group, Yuri Yudin, became seriously ill. He was suffering from joint pain and weakness that made it nearly impossible to continue skiing through deep snow. Reluctantly, and after a long discussion with the group, he decided to turn back. It was a decision that would save his life. Yudin would later say that he replayed that moment in his mind for the rest of his life. The remaining 9 hikers continued their journey alone. Their route led them toward a mountain known to the local indigenous Mansi people as Kholat Syakhl. In the Mansi language, the name roughly translates to Mountain of the Dead. During the days leading up to their disappearance, the hikers kept written diaries and took photographs along the trail. Their entries describe cold weather, strong winds, and difficult terrain, but nothing that suggests panic, fear, or conflict within the group. They joked with one another, celebrated small successes, and documented the beauty of the surrounding landscape. On the afternoon of February 1st, the group reached the slope of Kholat Syakhl. Weather conditions were deteriorating, visibility was low, and the wind was growing stronger. Instead of descending into the nearby forest for better shelter, the group decided to set up their tent on the open slope of the mountain. This choice has been questioned many times, but experienced hikers sometimes deliberately camp on exposed terrain in order to maintain their route and avoid losing altitude. Inside the tent, the group prepared food, changed clothing, and arranged their equipment for the night. Their cameras were placed near the entrance. Their boots were lined up. At some point during that night, something caused all 9 hikers to leave the tent in extreme urgency. They did not take their boots. They did not take their heavy coats. They did not take their heavy coats. Whatever happened unfolded quickly enough that survival equipment was left behind. The hikers were scheduled to send a telegram when they returned to civilization. When no message arrived, friends and family initially assumed the group had simply been delayed by weather. This was not unusual for winter expeditions. However, as more days passed without any contact, concern began to grow. By February 20th, Pressure from families forced authorities to organize a formal search. Volunteer students, local hunters, police officers, and later military personnel were sent into the region. Aircraft were used to scan the mountain slopes from above. The search teams were not prepared for what they were about to find. On February 26th, searchers located the group's abandoned campsite. The tent was still partially standing and had not been buried by a major avalanche, but one side of the fabric had been slashed open by several long cuts. Investigators quickly determined that the cuts had been made from inside the tent. Inside, almost all of the hikers' belongings remained: boots, thick winter jackets, backpacks, food supplies, personal documents, even money. Outside the tent, a line of footprints descended down the mountain toward the forest. Some of the footprints were made by bare feet. Others were made by people wearing only socks or thin footwear. The prints were surprisingly orderly at first, suggesting walking rather than running. There were no signs of additional footprints from strangers. There were no signs of animal attacks, only the tracks of the hikers themselves. At the edge of the forest, beneath a tall cedar tree, rescuers discovered the remains of a small fire. Nearby lay the bodies of two hikers. They were wearing only underwear and thin shirts. The branches of the tree were broken high above the ground, suggesting that someone had climbed it, possibly in an attempt to look toward the campsite or to escape something. The two hikers showed no fatal injuries. The cause of death was hypothermia. Between the cedar tree and the abandoned tent, searchers later found 3 more bodies. Among them was Igor Dyatlov. Their positions in the snow suggested that they had been moving uphill, back toward the tent. One appeared to have collapsed while crawling. Another lay face down, partially buried. Once again, there were no signs of a violent struggle. The official cause of death for these 5 hikers was exposure to extreme cold. But the story did not end there. Nearly 2 months later, when the snow began to melt, search teams discovered the remaining 4 hikers in a deep ravine, several meters below the surface. They were buried beneath thick layers of snow and ice. Unlike the first bodies, these 4 showed severe internal injuries. One man had extensive fractures to his skull. Another had multiple broken ribs on both sides of his chest. A woman suffered chest injuries so severe that medical examiners compared the force to that of a high-speed vehicle collision. Yet strangely, their skin showed very little external damage. There were no deep cuts, no large bruises, no clear signs that they had been beaten or struck with objects. One of the women was missing her tongue. Another hiker was missing both eyes. Later examinations suggested that animals may have removed some soft tissue after death, but the timing and circumstances remained uncertain. Adding to the confusion, investigators discovered that some of the clothing worn by these 4 hikers contained higher than normal levels of radiation. The source of this radiation was never clearly explained. A formal criminal investigation was opened. Dozens of witnesses were interviewed. Photographs and medical reports were collected. However, the case moved quickly toward an unusual conclusion. In May of 1959, investigators announced that the hikers had died as the result of what they described only as a compelling natural force. No criminal responsibility was assigned. No specific natural disaster was officially identified. Shortly afterward, the case files were closed and restricted. For decades, very little information was available to the public. Over the years, numerous explanations have been proposed. One theory suggests that a small slab avalanche may have struck the tent, forcing the group to escape quickly and seek shelter in the forest. Another theory points to secret Soviet military testing in the region, including parachute mines or experimental weapons that could explain the unusual injuries and reports of glowing lights in the sky. Some researchers propose that powerful wind patterns around the mountain may have created infrasound, a low-frequency vibration capable of causing intense anxiety, panic, and physical discomfort. According to this theory, the hikers may have fled their tent in a state of irrational fear. Local Mansi hunters were once suspected, but no evidence was ever found to support violence by other people. There were no defensive wounds, no foreign footprints, no weapons. And then there are the more controversial explanations. Unidentified aerial phenomena, secret operations never acknowledged. For many people, the lack of clear answers continues to fuel speculation. In recent years, Russian authorities reopened the case using modern forensic analysis and computer modeling. Their final conclusion stated that a delayed snow slab avalanche, combined with severe weather and limited visibility, most likely caused the initial panic and the chain of events that followed. According to this explanation, the hikers cut their way out of the tent to avoid being trapped, became disoriented in the darkness, and eventually succumbed to cold and injury. However, critics argue that this theory still does not fully explain the radiation, the severity of certain injuries, or the unusual distribution of the bodies. More than 60 years later, the Dyatlov Pass Incident remains one of the most haunting wilderness tragedies ever recorded. 9 skilled hikers entered the mountains. Only silence returned, and somewhere beneath the frozen slopes of Kolotsiakol, the truth may still be waiting. What do you believe really happened?